One of the things that we're curious about is latest goings on in City Hall. We understand a year ago, Commissioner Chad Malkus moved from his Ward 5 home or apartment. And then in the last couple of months, I think in December, Councilmember Brian Roche moved out of Ward 1 and lives somewhere else. And I believe since then, I think the Council President Lajan Cephas has also moved, but I'm not sure what that's about. What is going on here? Sounds like a game of musical chairs here. What's the challenge here, and what is the city confronting with all of these moves involving this 5 council body?
Well, certainly with all of the moves, they were all renters. Brian wound up buying a house, but the other 2 are had to move and to rent elsewhere. One of the things that we did not take into consideration when we changed the charter in the previous term council was that there would be so much of this. We anticipated, one person might have to do it and you might have to have one election. But tenants are subject to landlords making their own decisions about who they want in an apartment or whether they want to sell the townhouse and because the market is good. And so those people who are tenants are subject to the landlord's wishes and the lease that they have signed. So the issue of all of the movement really creates additional problems, again, that we didn't think about because we said, okay, we're just going to have an election thinking we would only have one.
Why does it matter what ward they live in as long as they live in the city proper?
Well, it's because that's what the charter says.
And as I understand it, the charter also calls for, in Malkus's case, there was a 12-month period in which he had to return to his ward.
Right.
And that period, as I understand it, expired March 1st. So is he now not a valid member of the county council? And does this implicate any council actions that have been taken since March 1st?
So the city attorney has said that person who may lose his position because he didn't stay or he did move back into the ward gets to stay until there's a special election. And then he would be subject to losing his position because a new person was elected. Based on the fact of the city attorney's opinion, Chad Malkus gets to continue on until there's that special election and someone else is elected to represent Ward 5.
But so the city attorney's opinion notwithstanding, I mean, you're a lawyer and a judge, former judge. Is there a conflict then between the city charter and state law in Maryland on this question?
Well, no. What the city attorney indicated was that there was the charter amendment that we wrote, because we were not thinking we would have 2 or 3 people out there, is not clear enough. And so because it is not clear that, for instance, it were to say, if you're not back in a year, you automatically no longer can be a city commissioner, and the place, that position will be vacant until there's an election. That would be clear that Chad, in this case, could not continue on. But the language of the charter is, to some, vague enough that we then have to look at case law, and the case law from Maryland is that he should continue until we have that special election.
Has a special election been called? Discussion about that.
It hadn't been called because once it is called by council, then it has to occur within 45 days.
So that triggers the clock.
That triggers the clock. And so it has not been called. There was a motion at the meeting last month, I think.
Last month being in February.
February, or maybe it was early March, I can't remember now, but there was a motion to call the election, and that was defeated 4-1.
Why? What was the argument against having an election right away?
Well, there was a discussion about it, about the pros and cons. A couple of the issues that were raised was that the election board would be better prepared later on. We still hadn't heard back from the private provider as to what his cost would be. So there were some issues that we were unclear.
So there are two options here. One is the election board, the other is a private contractor.
Correct.
In terms of administering an election.
Yeah.
Which would be a special election in the city of Cambridge, in what we might call an off year, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and the other thing was cost. If we had one election right away, or here in May, that would be a cost that could be up to $25,000. And then if we had to do it again in January for Brian Roche's seat, the Ward 1 seat, that would be another $25,000, which would be, it's a lot of money that we could use elsewhere for other things. In my view, it would be great to be using it for our kids, summer jobs, that sort of stuff.
This is really an unfortunate situation for the city of Cambridge, isn't it?
Well, it is, but to me, it's also an opportunity to look at how you could do it in a better way and an equitable way. For instance, I have proposed that when we change the charter, we have, instead of a president and a chair pro tem, that we have a vice mayor, so that if the mayor were to leave office, the vice mayor would simply move up and become mayor, so there wouldn't be an election there. And then there would be an election to replace that person who had been the vice mayor. Then the issue is, well, do you do appointments or do you do elections? And then there are different ways that different communities approach it. Some do appointments if it's within 2 years. Others do elections if it's more than 2 years until the next election. And that's an issue that we have to hassle out, listen to the community about, and make some decisions about.
But do all those decisions need to be made before we call a special election, or is it a foregone conclusion we're going to have special elections?
No, we have
sooner?
to have the special election.
But the hope then is still that it will be consolidated into one election to handle both situations, both the Roche situation and the Malka situation.
Right. Because in the Roche situation, Brian doesn't have to resign until
December.
And so in that, if he's chosen, and what he said was, look, if I can have the opportunity to run, I'll be happy to have it earlier and let the chips fall where they may.
They would have to run in the wards that they live in now, the new.
Right.
Right.
So that Brian would run in 5 and Chad would run in 1.
So in other words, they've switched wards, essentially.
Sure. Yeah, that's correct. And then with President Cephas, her lease was terminated, apparently, and she had to move out, but she stated her intention to move back into her ward before the year's out. So we have to believe that's what her intention is, and that's what she'll do.
And it seems particularly unfortunate to a lot of people in this town because we're going to have elections anyways in 2024, right? All of these city commissioner positions expire in January of 2015. So presumably we'd have elections in 2024, a year from now. So we're going to have to spend $25,000 or $50,000 on an election that covers the next 12 months. There's no way around that, though, is there?
Well, there is no way around it. That's what the charter says, and what we got to do. It's more than 12 months, though. It would be June until, if that's what we did, June until January the next year, so it'd be an 18-month.
A little more than a year.
But still, yes, that cost will be there.
This whole issue has brought up an interesting debate, I think, about Cambridge and the history of Cambridge. And that is why the ward system that we have is so sacrosanct. I mean, one way of looking at this is we'll just let this ride. I mean, these guys all still live in the city. They can still represent their wards no matter where they live. but I understand that that bumps up against a history of racial discrimination in the city, which is why we have the ward system that we do, to make sure that the people who represent the various wards of this town actually live in the wards that they represent. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I know there was litigation years ago. There's a case that Chuck McFadden mentioned, and I went.
Chuck McFadden from the Cambridge Association of Neighborhoods.
And I went and dug out the case and read it. I don't have a full recollection of everything it said, but it was dealing with issues of discrimination that had been present in Cambridge for a long time that required change. And was very appropriate. I'm looking now at Febblesburg. There's a lawsuit there because there has been no African American elected, according to what I've read, ever in Febblesburg because of the way their elective system is set up.
So in other words, if we didn't have the ward system that we have, it would be possible that all 5 of our commissioners could come presumably from the wealthiest, whitest ward with the most voter turnout, and there'd be no African American or any other type of minority representation. Is that the fear?
Well,
or the concern, I should say.
Well, I would say is it shouldn't be the fear because it's not going to happen.
Well, it doesn't come up in this particular instance because we're talking about 2 white members.
It will never happen. I mean, why would we change back to a system that is discriminatory? Why would we go back and create a system for people to run from anywhere and represent part of the community or not represent part of the community that needs representation?
Right. Yeah, and that's the reason why it's important to bring this up, I think, because so that people understand why we have the award system, because otherwise it'd be very easy to just say, what difference does it make what ward these folks live in? Who cares where they lay their heads at night when they go to bed? As long as they represent their wards, they can live anywhere. So I think that's the undercurrent here that I think has bothered some people.
I don't have a question at the end of that.
No, I'm wondering if you agree that this brings to a head the importance of the ward system, as opposed to a lot of towns and cities have at-large representation all around, and so council members can come from anywhere. They can all come from the same neighborhood.
All I know is what we have in Cambridge is 5 wards, 5 separate representatives. You got to live in the ward. You got to stay in the ward. If you move out, you're given a time to move back. And I think that's an appropriate way to handle the citizen representation here in an important way, so that all voices are heard from all parts of the city.